Hi everyone in English 2323, it's Dr. E and I'm here with your week 3 instructional video. So I want to do a couple of things in this time that we have, and of course we're going to go into D2L. I'll show you where to go and what to do for this upcoming week, but what I also want to do is take a little time to make some connections between those things that we read and wrote about last week and connect to this upcoming week. So the first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about our course text. So I posted in D2L that after some back and forth with the contact we have for Norton Publishing, they no longer have the online version of our course text, which is really frustrating. I don't have anything good to say about that, but I want us to think about the text and how we read it. So as always, I want you to make sure that you're taking your time when it comes to the reading, breaking it up into different sessions. Don't just try to sit and read everything at once, especially because we're in the earlier Romantic period. The writing is a bit more dense, the language is a bit different, so it takes longer and it takes more concentration on our part because we're talking about speech and writing patterns that just aren't part of our contemporary not part of our habit, right, to think or read in those kinds of ways or speak in those kinds of ways. So make sure that you're taking your time. I also want to make sure that we are distinguishing between the primary and the secondary texts within our whole book, right? So when we think of those things, the readings that are written during the time period we are studying. So last week, Anna Leticia Barbald's poem, or if we're thinking about this week's Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Those are primary texts. They are written during the time, right, that we are studying. And then we have various secondary texts that are to provide us with context. So our background chapter reading on the Romantic period, which I know was super entertaining and very easy to read. Those are secondary texts. The biographies are written by people who have put our book together, the editors. So we need to make sure that we're distinguishing, you know, who gets credit for what that you may be using in your future posts or writing, that kind of thing. This upcoming week, when you're asked to include some quotes, make sure that you are just credit Stephen Greenblatt. He is our overall main course, our main text editor. You don't have to go in and find the specific person who worked on that section. It's okay. Crediting Greenblatt is enough for me because he is the main editor. So if you're referencing the Romantic period reading, utilize quotes, use the page number only, Greenblatt's last name. And then if you are referencing one of the authors, make sure that you're putting that person's last name or giving that person credit in your writing. So a few little kind of MLA things, and I'll revisit that in the instructions for the discussion post. So our book can be a little overwhelming because of that. It's reading after reading after reading. So we just want to make sure in our minds we're distinguishing between what was written during the period and what has come after and been included by our editors. All right, so I'm going to jump to where to go, what to do, and then we'll continue on this conversation as we go. So if we go to the content area and take a look at week 3, I do want to make a note here that I have changed the page range for our reading of Mary Wollstonecraft's text, and that's because in rereading it this past week, it's dense. It's an important text. It's one that we really should take some time, put some effort into. But I think shortening that page range still gives us what we need in terms of, you know, understanding her ideas and the fact that it was quite radical at the time for this woman to be writing this, especially after reading our intro on the Romantic period. We know that, you know, there were just certain roles that women during this time period in Great Britain did not necessarily take on. And I want us to really keep in mind, you know, so let's go back to Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk, you know, The Danger of a Single Story. We don't want to read everything in our text without thinking about those voices that have not been included. So when we're talking about women writers at this time in Great Britain, we are largely talking about white women who had very different experiences than those women of color living in Great Britain at this time period, right? So there are always these kinds of absences and gaps in those things that we read. And some of them are very intentional, right? There were women who were not allowed to write, who were not allowed to be educated. So we have to make sure that we're kind of keeping those things in mind as part of the context when we're thinking about our readings from here on out. right? So I just didn't think that we needed the full page range for Wollstonecraft, but make sure you're taking some time with her biography, because that really is going to affect the way and the topics that she writes about ultimately. So you'll have the instructional video, which you're watching now, as well as a discussion post. We're going to ease into the group work. Instead of having the participation boss upload the scribes document in the assessment form, that will start to be the common move when it comes to group work. We're just going to have a discussion. We're going to work with one another, you know, through ideas and that kind of thing. It's just going to be in a smaller kind of group space, okay? So by Thursday, you should have responded to the initial prompt. And then by Sunday, you'll need to respond to all of your colleagues. So that becomes our kind of discussion, right? Our conversation. And then you have your participation quiz. So if we scroll down, you're watching what will appear here. I put to review the Literary League's basics just to kind of work as a reminder as we get used to this, and then the online discussion post rubric. So this is something you'll want to kind of take a look at to revisit the length requirements. Most of the time I put the requirements for the length in any particular week, but it's just good to have a sense of what the expectations are, especially because those expectations will continue to increase as we move forward, as you start to understand, you know, what I'm looking for when it comes to grading, what you need to do to get that grade that you want to earn. So we're moving from like 5-point grades, now we're into 10-point grades, you know, and things will steadily increase as we get more practice with this. All right, so we do have our week 3 discussion. And so I put some notes in here, right? Because, you know, it just seems helpful for you to make sure that I'm being clear with my expectations. So I put note that when we're thinking about MLA, her title would usually be italicized, so A Vindication of the Rights of Women. It is a complete work, so we tend to italicize, just like we italicize the name of a book or a novel. It used to be we underlined them, but that's so old-fashioned now, we italicize them. But because her work is one entry in our overall course book, which is an anthology, it is in quotation marks, okay? So just kind of coming in with some of that MLA stuff here. So though we are taking a reading or entry from our anthology, and any text on our book is considered an entry, like background chapters, biographies, and those primary texts, you know, we want to make sure that we're thinking of those with quotation marks when we reference them. Last week we read about the Romantic era. Now we need to connect those ideas to Wollstonecraft. So in 3 paragraphs, I want you to make some connections. So read through this paragraph, right, to get a sense of really what I'm looking for. And I put, you know, you need quotes to support your ideas, but those quotes should be pretty brief. So sometimes to fill space, we have this idea of, well, if we need about 6 to 7 sentences per paragraph, I'm just going to drop like 4 sentences of quotes. In academic writing, especially about literature, no, in all academic writing, those quotes are there to support our ideas. So sometimes I have students whose habits are usually to start a paragraph with a quote and then explain the quote, start a paragraph with a quote. That's not what we do when we're trying to really analyze something. So those quotes support what our ideas are. So the topic sentence of each paragraph needs to relate to what it is you're overall trying to argue or share or analyze, okay? So we don't want a bunch of just quotes dropped in without any explanation. So no, that quote should be brief and used to support your ideas. You know, I put, we may rely too heavily on quotes, right? And I really emphasize, like, your ideas are important, right? So sometimes we have that crutch that we lean on when writing with the quotes, but our ideas are really important, right? And those quotes are there to support what we are thinking about. Okay, you're being the literary critic here, right? I put a little more about MLA because when referencing the introductory chapter, it's okay to refer to our main text editor, Greenblatt. But, you know, so Wollstonecraft should be credited for her own words, but she didn't write her own biography, right? So sometimes our inclination is to credit her with her own biography, but she didn't write that, right? it's from those people that put our book together. So just make sure you're kind of distinguishing between those. And I did put a link here for the Purdue Online Writing Lab website. In some of your discussion posts from this past week, I made note about MLA, and I'm not here to be the MLA police. I'm not here to be the grammar police, right? If I comment on those things, it's just kind of as a gentle reminder, right? So that you know moving forward and it becomes part of your writing habit, okay? So if you click on this link, it shows you how to quote, right? Last name and page only, no P period or the word page. Y'all, I know MLA is the worst. I know it, but it's what we have to work with. So we have these guidelines and we got to work within them, okay? Even if they're frustrating and seem to make no sense. Okay. So if we go back to D2L and to our discussion post, I put, I'm going to definitely admit that writing about literature can be different and are difficult, and it is different than any other kind of writing we do, especially in school, right? So take time to review the reading from last week and the ideas, maybe do some pre-writing, do some thought bubbles or mind maps, that kind of thing. After you do this, you need to also create 2 thoughtful and thought-provoking questions for your league members to answer. Okay, so we don't want just questions that are quick yeses or nos. We want questions that are pushing people to think about those readings, the time period, that kind of thing, right? Pushing them to show what they know and what they've read. Okay. All right, you're going to engage with all members of your league by Sunday, right? And I put no documents need to be uploaded this week by the participation boss or the scribe. This is the work that we're doing, okay? So you just want to click Start a New Thread and make sure that you utilize your name and chosen pronouns should you choose, okay? All right, so if we go back to week 3, the only other thing we necessarily need to worry about this week is your quiz. And so the quiz, I'm not going to lie, it's an intense one this week because it is not only asking a few questions from our reading last week because we are making those connections, but it's also diving into Wollstonecraft's text. So make sure that you have read the work, have it in front of you if you need to in order to answer those questions, in addition to some of the questions from this video, like that the random word this week is water. All right, so if you have any questions or concerns, please post in that Q&A discussion board area. I really appreciate that you have been using that space, and feel free to help one another. If you know the answer, don't be afraid to jump in there. I will go in and make sure that everybody's on the same page, but if you see something that you want to answer, please go for it. And you can always email me directly if you have something a little bit more personal that you want to address. But y'all, it's week 3. You're doing so well. Have a great week. Good luck.